When you're on your way over to the car with the examiner will ask you some questions about the inside of your bonnet. He can ask you some exterior checks as well. So we'll just have a brief run through now of the checks that the examiner might want to make with you. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to open up our bonnet. So a lot of cars have got a handle on the inside, but on this particular car you use the key. Okay, now failure to open the bonnet will result in a fault on your driving test, so please do make sure you know how to open your bonnet. Okay, so we'll open up our bonnet now. Okay, under the bonnet you have a number of things that the examiner might ask you to identify. Okay, one of the things is just here, which would be your coolant level. Okay, now the examiner may ask you, how do you know if your coolant level is low? Now, on majority of coolant bottles, they have a very, very obvious max and minimum mark on the bottle. So it's normally on the front or the side, okay? So make sure your coolant is above minimum, okay? Now, the next thing that they might ask, they could ask you where your windscreen washer fluid is. So, it's just here on the left-hand side on this car. It's marked with a windscreen. So, just identify that. If they ask how you would know if the actual windscreen fluid level was low, just say, if you went to squirt the water and no water were to come out, that you can just assume that the bottle is empty. Okay, so they may ask you about your brake fluid. Okay, now your brake fluid is generally marked with symbols. Again, if you looked in your user manual for your vehicle, you'll be able to identify the brake fluid quite easily. You've got a minimum max marking on the brake fluid, so just check that the level is above minimum. Okay, another thing that they can ask would be power steering fluid. Now this particular vehicle doesn't actually have power steering fluid because it's electrical. But again, check your user manual on your car and be able to identify where the power steering fluid is and how you would check its level. Now, another thing they could ask would be the oil. Now, we have a dipstick for checking our oil. Our dipstick is normally marked in yellow, but again, check your user manual. You will know from reading your user manual on your car where all these things are. Now, you do not have to take out the dipstick, but you do have to explain how to use the dipstick. So when you're explaining how to use the dipstick, you say, you remove the dipstick, make sure the car is on a flat surface, remove the dipstick, wipe the dipstick with a cloth, place it back into where you removed it from, remove it again, and the oil will show on the end of the dipstick. There'll be a minimum and a maximum marker. So that is how you check your oil with your dipstick. If you require oil, you just pour the oil on the top of the engine. It's marked with an oil cap. The examiner may also ask you that. Okay, so that is basically the under the bonnet checks that the examiner may ask. Now, another thing the examiners will look for is they will look to make certain that your discs, all your discs on your car, are relevant, all details are correct, and that they're all in date. Okay. Now, on this particular car, we've got a tax and insurance disc. The reason we don't have an NCT disc is because the car is not 4 years old. If your car is 4 years old or older, you will have to have a relevant NCT disc on display. Okay. Now, it's very important to check all details on your discs because mistakes do actually happen. For example, I'm reading the registration number off this disc, and I'm checking that the registration number is the same as what is read on the front of the car. There are a lot of occasions where examiners check the disc to find that the actual registration number is out by 1 digit. Human error. Insurance companies make mistakes. It's up to you to make certain all your details are correct. So check that your insurance disc, the registration is correct. Same thing on your tax disc, okay? You must have current tax before you can do your test. You cannot do your test with an expired tax disc, okay? So again, make sure as well, if you have an NCT due, that your NCT disc is on display. Otherwise, you may find the examiner cannot conduct the driving test. The other thing the examiners will check is the tires on your car. Okay, now your tires must be properly inflated. Okay, if they ask what pressure should your tires be inflated to, again, consult your manufacturer's guide to your car. It states clearly what each tire pressure should be set at. Okay, now they're looking for a couple of things. So the tire pressure, as we said, they're looking for the condition of the tire. Now a tire in itself must have a minimum tread depth of 1.6 millimeters. Now the way you can check the tread depth of your tires is to actually have a look at your tires. So you turn your wheels out to face you, and down the center of the tire you'll find the main ridges of your tire. Now in the center of these ridges you will find a small lump. There's one for every ridge. Now once your tire wears down to that small lump, evenly the surface of your tyre, that means that your tyre is due to be replaced. Now, another thing that's very important about your tyres is that there can be no cuts or tears in the side of your tyre. Now, it's worth remembering that all 4 tyres will be scrutinised by the examiner. Again, if there is a problem with one of your tyres, you do run the chance of not getting taken on your test for health and safety reasons. So it's worth having a good inspection of your tyres a couple of days before the test, and again, maybe an hour before the test. So if there are any difficulties, you can actually do something about it and get that tyre changed. Now, as part of the exterior checks as well, the examiner may ask you to tell him how you would know that your lenses of your lights were okay. Now, it's very, very simple. The lenses should be clean. They should be free of any holes or cracks. Okay, so that's basically how the lenses work. If they ask you how you would check your headlights, you would say you would get somebody to stand in front of the vehicle and you turn your lights on and off and check that they're working, okay? Now, indicators are checked on every driving test as well. They must flash amber. If they don't flash amber, the examiner will refuse to take the car for test, because a white light in bright daylight cannot be seen. Okay, so make sure that your indicators do flash amber. Now, after you've done the under the bonnet checks and any external checks that the examiner has asked you to demonstrate, the examiner will then ask you to demonstrate that your indicators and brake lights are working effectively. So what will happen is the examiner will ask you to get into the vehicle, to wind down your window, and then to follow his instructions from that point on. So the examiner will ask you to put your foot on the brake and indicate left and right. They will be standing at the back of the car while you're doing that, and then they'll walk to the front of the car and they'll ask you to indicate left and right. Now, regarding your under the bonnet checks and exterior checks, if you feel that you're not confident enough with your knowledge, then maybe you don't have a manual for your vehicle, maybe anything at all. Just go to seek professional advice. Go to a garage. They will happily show you where these things are. Okay, so make sure you're prepared. Now, one last detail, very important detail, L plates. L plates should be displayed on your vehicle at the front and the rear. Failure to display L plates means that your test will not get conducted. So make sure you've got everything in order.